I shared a photo of my daughter lying in the ICU after a critical surgery. Her tiny face was pale beneath the hospital lights. Tubes surrounded her, and the machines beside her bed filled the room with steady mechanical beeps. Along with the photo, I sent one simple message to my family. She keeps asking for her family. My sister replied almost immediately, "We're too busy. You handle it." A few seconds later, my father added the words that hollowed something inside me. "She's alive. That should be enough." I stared at my phone until the screen dimmed. Around me, nurses moved quickly through the hallway while rain tapped softly against the hospital window. My daughter stirred, her weak voice barely above a whisper. "Is Grandpa coming?" I forced a smile I didn't feel and gently brushed her hair away from her forehead. "They know you're here," I said quietly. She nodded, trusting me without question, then drifted back to sleep. I looked at my family's messages one last time before typing my reply. "Don't worry. I understand." They probably thought I'd accepted my place, the reliable one who never complained, never demanded anything, never made them uncomfortable. They had no idea that those 4 words weren't surrender. They were the last courtesy I would ever give them. By the time their doorbell rang that night, everything they believed about our family had already begun to fall apart. People often assume the strongest person in a family is the one who speaks the loudest. In mine, strength meant staying quiet while everyone else took what they wanted. I learned that lesson early. My mother passed away when I was 17, and from that day forward, I became the dependable one. I organized family dinners, remembered birthdays, drove my father to appointments, and helped my sister whenever she found herself in another crisis. No one asked me how I was doing. They simply expected me to keep showing up. After I married, very little changed. My husband worked long hours, and when our daughter was born, our world revolved around her. She was kind, curious, and somehow managed to see the best in everyone, even people who didn't deserve it. My family adored taking photos with her during holidays because she made us look like the perfect family. Once the celebrations ended, the phone calls stopped until they needed another favor. I convinced myself that family wasn't measured by fairness. I told myself that love required patience, sacrifice, and forgiveness. Every time my sister forgot to repay money I had lent her, I stayed silent. Every time my father canceled plans with us to help someone else, I smiled and said I understood. It became easier to lower my expectations than to admit I was being taken for granted. The hardest part wasn't their selfishness. It was realizing they believed I would never stop giving. In their minds, I was the safety net that would always be there, no matter how little they appreciated it. As I sat beside my daughter's hospital bed that night, listening to the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, a painful truth settled over me. They hadn't ignored my message because they couldn't come. They ignored it because they never imagined there would be consequences. The days after my daughter's surgery blurred together in a cycle of hospital corridors, whispered updates from doctors, and sleepless nights beside her bed. My family never visited. Instead, they sent messages that felt more like obligations than concern. My sister texted once to ask if I could transfer money for an event she was planning. She never mentioned my daughter until the very last line. "Hope she's feeling better." My father called only because he couldn't find the paperwork for one of his insurance policies. After I helped him locate it through email, he thanked me, paused for a moment, and hung up without asking how his granddaughter was recovering. Those silences said more than any cruel words ever could. When my daughter finally opened her eyes for longer than a few minutes, she smiled weakly and asked if we could invite Grandpa over once she was home. I looked away, pretending to adjust her blanket so she wouldn't see the hesitation on my face. "We'll see," I answered gently. A week later, I drove her to a follow-up appointment. On the way back, we passed my father's neighborhood. His car sat in the driveway. My sister's was parked beside it. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of laughter around the dining table. Plates were full, glasses were raised, and everyone seemed perfectly comfortable. No one had told us they were gathering. No one had thought to ask if the little girl recovering from major surgery wanted to join them. I kept driving without slowing down. My daughter waved toward the house anyway, believing someone might notice us. No one looked outside. That quiet moment hurt more than any argument could have. As I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, I stopped wondering whether they cared. For the first time, I began wondering what life would look like if they no longer had the privilege of taking us for granted. The turning point didn't arrive with an argument or a dramatic confrontation. It came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, a month after my daughter's surgery, when her doctor smiled for the first time and said she was recovering better than expected. As we walked out of the hospital, she slipped her small hand into mine and asked, "Mom, are we still waiting for everyone to visit?" I stopped beside the entrance. People hurried past us carrying flowers, balloons, and coffee cups, but for a moment, the world seemed unusually quiet. "No," I answered softly. "We're not waiting anymore." She looked up at me with innocent confusion, then simply nodded. Children have a remarkable way of accepting the truth when it's spoken. Gently that evening, I opened a folder on my laptop containing years of family responsibilities. I had managed my father's finances online, organized his medical appointments, renewed insurance policies, paid emergency bills he always promised to repay, and coordinated nearly every holiday gathering. My sister depended on me just as much. I handled paperwork, watched her children whenever she asked, and quietly solved problems she never even acknowledged. None of it was legally required. I had done it because I believed family meant showing up, even when the effort wasn't returned. For the first time, I began removing my name from everything I had volunteered to manage. I sent polite emails transferring responsibilities back to their rightful owners, canceled recurring payments that came from my account, and closed the shared calendar I had maintained for years. There were no angry messages, no speeches, no threats, just quiet boundaries, one careful step at a time. When I finally closed my laptop, I didn't feel revenge. I felt something far more unfamiliar. Relief. And when the doorbell rang at my father's house later that night, with documents requiring his immediate attention, and no one left to quietly rescue him, the consequences of years of taking me for granted had finally arrived, exactly as they should. I never believed revenge had to be loud to be effective. The most lasting consequences usually come from people simply stepping back and allowing others to face the responsibilities they had ignored for years. Because I had worked as an administrative coordinator for nearly a decade, organization had become second nature to me. I understood paperwork, deadlines, insurance renewals, payment schedules, and the quiet systems that kept everyday life running. My family rarely noticed those details because I made sure nothing ever fell through the cracks. Now I treated my own future with the same care. I met with a financial advisor to review my savings and create an emergency plan centered on my daughter's needs. I updated my legal documents, changed the beneficiaries where appropriate, and removed myself as the contact person for accounts and services I had managed only as a favor. Every change was legitimate, documented, and communicated in writing. There were no surprises, only responsibilities returning to the people who actually owned them. I also stopped saying yes automatically. When my sister texted asking if I could watch her children for the weekend, I replied politely that I already had plans with my daughter. When my father asked me to sort out another insurance issue, I sent him the customer service number and wished him luck. At first, they assumed I was simply busy. That misunderstanding worked in my favor. I didn't block their numbers or post emotional messages online. I attended no family arguments because there weren't any. I simply redirected every request back to the person responsible for it. Meanwhile, my weekends became quieter. My daughter and I spent them walking through parks, reading together, and celebrating the ordinary moments we had nearly lost. The energy I had once poured into fixing other people's lives finally belonged where it always should have. By the time my family realized I wasn't coming back to carry their burdens, there was nothing left to debate. The silence had already made my decision permanent. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded the way autumn leaves fall, quietly, one after another, until the landscape looked completely different. A few weeks after I stepped away, my phone began lighting up almost every evening. At first, it was small things. My father couldn't access an online account because he had never learned the password recovery process. My sister had forgotten a payment deadline for an event she was organizing and wanted me to work my magic one more time. For the first time in years, I didn't interrupt my life to solve their problems. I answered politely. I can't help with that anymore. Nothing more. Nothing less. Soon, the gaps I had quietly filled became impossible for them to ignore. Family gatherings became disorganized. Bills that I used to remind them about arrived late. Appointments were missed because no one had written them on the calendar I once managed. They weren't disasters, just the ordinary consequences of expecting one person to carry everyone else's responsibilities. One evening, my father knocked on my door. He looked older than I remembered. The confidence in his voice had been replaced by long pauses and lowered eyes. "I didn't realize how much you were doing," he admitted. I listened without interrupting. Then he glanced toward the living room, where my daughter was laughing while building a puzzle on the floor. She was healthier now, her smile brighter than it had been in months. "You should have been here," I said quietly. "She waited for you." He opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. There was nothing left for me to argue about. His silence acknowledged everything his messages never had. I wished him well and gently closed the door. As I locked it, I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Some people believe revenge is making others suffer. I learned that sometimes the deepest lesson comes from allowing people to live with the weight of their own choices, without someone quietly carrying it for them. The months that followed were quieter than I ever imagined. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because I had finally stopped confusing peace with keeping everyone else comfortable. News traveled through the family faster than I expected. My aunt called to ask why I was no longer organizing birthdays or holiday dinners. A cousin quietly admitted that no one had realized how much work happened behind the scenes until it stopped happening. For years, they had only noticed the celebrations, never the person who made them possible. My sister tried a different approach. Instead of demanding help, she sent shorter messages. "Can we start over?" I never answered with anger. I simply replied that rebuilding trust takes time, consistency, and genuine effort, not another promise made out of convenience. My father reached out more often than before, but our conversations had changed. He no longer assumed I would solve his problems before asking about my daughter. For the first time in years, he listened when she spoke. Whether it came from regret or loneliness, I couldn't say. What mattered was that respect had finally replaced expectation. As for me, I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was to other people. That had been my greatest mistake. I believed love had to be earned through endless sacrifice, when in reality, healthy relationships are built on mutual care, not silent obligation. Looking back, I realized the hospital wasn't where my family broke my heart. It was where they unknowingly gave it back to me. Watching my daughter laugh, without waiting for people who never came, reminded me of something I wish I had understood years earlier. The people who truly value you don't only appear when life is easy. They show up when your world is falling apart. And if someone repeatedly chooses not to, believing you'll always forgive and carry the burden, the kindest thing you can do for them and for yourself is to stop carrying it. A year has passed since the night I stopped chasing people who had already chosen their priorities. My daughter barely remembers the hospital now. The long scar across her abdomen is fading, and whenever she asks about it, I tell her it reminds us how strong she was, not how abandoned we felt. She has grown into a child who laughs easily again, and that sound has become the measure of every decision I make. My relationship with my family still exists, but it no longer rests on my silence. We meet occasionally, exchange polite conversations, and celebrate milestones without pretending the past never happened. Forgiveness, I discovered, is not the same as forgetting. It simply means refusing to let old wounds decide who I become. Sometimes my father lingers a little longer before leaving, as if searching for words that arrived years too late. My sister now handles her own responsibilities without expecting me to rescue her. They changed, not because I demanded it, but because life finally required them to carry the weight they had always handed to me. As for me, I no longer mistake endless sacrifice for love. Real love shows up. It sits beside hospital beds. It answers late-night phone calls. It chooses people over convenience, especially when doing so is difficult. Looking back, I don't remember the cruel messages as clearly as I once did. What stays with me is the moment I realized I could give my daughter something far more valuable than a perfect extended family. I could give her a mother who respected herself enough to walk away from being taken for granted. If she grows up learning only one lesson from our story, I hope it's this: never beg for a place in someone's life when your absence is the only thing that teaches them your value. That night, my family's doorbell marked the end of one chapter. The day I chose peace over approval became the beginning of mine.